So hello and good evening, and thank you for attending this webinar. We are so pleased to be kicking off the first ever San Diego Green Building Council Sustainable Building Week with you all. Please be sure to check out all the other informative webinars available during the Sustainable Building Week, which can be found on the SDGBC website. This presentation, which is presented to you by the San Diego Building Electrification Coalition, SDBEC, we'll discuss why it's so important to eliminate natural gas from the buildings we live and work in. So a little bit about our presenters. My name is Robert Carr, and I'm a local sustainability consultant who works to make the built environment more sustainable. I have a master's in sustainability leadership. I have a lead AP in operations and maintenance, and I'm also co-chair of the SDBEC messaging working group. Kamryn Alexandrya is a senior at Sonoma State University, finishing up her major in environmental studies with an emphasis in energy management. She has a passion for making a just transition and addressing environmental injustice. She has been an intern with SD350 since October 2020. And our last speaker is Carl. He is a conservation organizer for the Sierra Club San Diego and an active member of the SDBEC. Carl is the president of the North County Climate Change Alliance, and he has a degree in electrical engineering and helped co-found the San Diego Hub of the Sunrise Movement, a youth climate justice organization. Just a few reminders about the norms of this presentation. All attendees will be muted. If you have any questions, please feel free to add them to the chat, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. And also, we are recording this webinar as we speak. This presentation will start by introducing the SDBEC, its mission, and resources it has available to help the building electrification transition. And we'll be, BE is short for building electrification when we use that. Then we'll discuss a high level of what building electrification is and how we can electrify our buildings and why is this so important. Then Cam will dive down and discuss the many health issues associated with using natural gas in buildings that we live and work in. And then she'll discuss why it's so important to have a just transition while we do this, and discuss environmental justice issues associated with building electrification. And then lastly, Carl will discuss in detail the technology that allow us to electrify our buildings and make the buildings that we work in and live in as energy efficient as possible. So the SDBEC, short for San Diego Building Electrification Coalition, formed in November 2020 to advocate for building electrification. It's a coalition of community, environmental, and civic organizations. And we are currently trying to grow the coalition by talking with labor groups and other groups and builders and the like to make this a very holistic kind of organization. We provide educational presentations to the public like this one, and we're developing building electrification training programs for builders and installers and homeowners to kind of grow the amount of people that actually are helping electrify our buildings from the ground up. And then also our goal is to reach out to cities in the region to advocate in favor of BE REACH codes, which are codes that go beyond the current building codes to require all electric in new development and ban any new gas hookups. As you can see here, these are the logos of our many coalition members. We are growing by the week. And I just want to make sure that we understand that we're fighting for at the moment for all electric new construction. We know that eventually our buildings, we're going to need to convert the existing buildings, we're going to need to convert them to all electric, but our initial goal is to stop the expansion of any new gas infrastructure. So the SDBEC has just launched our website, which has many resources for learning about and creating all electric buildings. This includes a questionnaire for technical assistance, which will allow our BE experts to help those wishing to make their buildings all electric. So what I'd like to do is take a quick tour of this of our website. So if you type in www.sdbec.org, you'll come to this landing page, and there's many drop-down menus. You'll see our mission. We'd love if you put in your information here so we can keep you up to date with any news, any updates, and a couple quick links to resources that we have, including that intake form that we have. So if you have any questions about how to electrify your building, go ahead and fill that out, and one of our experts will get back to you about how to do that. We have an events page. We have access to our previous webinars, so go ahead and look at those. I want to take you a quick look at our resources page, and there's so many here that are just about educating about what building electrification is, what we are, health considerations, equitable access, city resources, how to make it a just transition, builder and contractor resources, homeowner resources, and video. So when you get time, please come and have a look. You'll find a lot of things to look at to learn more about building electrification. And then lastly, we have our Take Action page, where the first thing we'd like to do is sign this petition for building electrification. When we go to electeds here locally, we can just say, hey, we have this huge amount of people that are for this, and by signing the petition, you allow us to do that. And then we have some other petitions for Mothers Out Front and Earth Justice. And if you'd like to join a coalition, just be a member and volunteer, go ahead and click on the Join Us button there, and we'll get back to you, and that'd be great. All right, so I'm gonna go back to our slideshow. Also, we have social media, so please follow us on Twitter, on Instagram and Facebook, and our YouTube channel. So lots of things that we're posting stuff every single day there. So good way to keep in touch with that. What we'd like, if you want to continue to support the building electrification here in San Diego, our next meeting is going to be May 13th at 4 p.m. via Zoom. And you can go and you can sign up on our website there that I showed you. And then again, my contact information if you would like to contact me to learn more about this. So what is building electrification on a high level? All right, it basically is quite simply it's installing all electric appliances like heat pump water heaters and heat pumps for space heating in place of those that use natural gas. BE applies to all buildings, commercial, residential, mid-rise, high-rise, single family, doesn't matter. And this transition will require that we have to change our building codes. All right, we have to kind of do this quickly, and so that's why we're advocating for these REACH codes. And that's why I said that. So whenever we're talking to electeds, we're trying to get them to do REACH codes to make all new construction all electric. There are many reasons we need to electrify our buildings. The first one is that there's some serious climate benefits to building electrification. It reduces emissions by eliminating burning natural gas in buildings and replacing that energy with renewable sources. Also, local, regional, and state climate targets simply can't be met unless we electrify our buildings. There are many adverse health effects associated with indoor pollution generated when we use natural gas in our buildings. This is mostly in residential situations, cooking and the like. And we'll go more into that, Cam will go more into that later in this presentation. And then there's lower costs associated with operating all electric buildings, as well as the construction of those buildings. All electric appliances are much more efficient than natural gas ones. And again, Carl will definitely dive down into why that is. And then there's some public safety risks associated with the extraction, transportation, storage, and delivery of natural gas. A couple examples, we live in earthquake country, so when we have an earthquake, these lines are susceptible to rupture, releasing that gas, and if there's any ignition source, there's fires, and that that has happened quite a bit in the past. And if any of you remember the massive Aliso Canyon gas leak that's up there in the LA area, where just tons and tons of methane gas were released into the atmosphere for basically weeks on end, just exacerbating this climate change issue already with just keep on releasing these gases. Also, why is BE good for San Diego? Well, I don't know if you've known it, but we just, Community Choice Energy was just launched here in San Diego and will be available to almost all San Diegans by 2021. This will allow our all electric buildings to reduce emissions associated with the energy they use. Then as the amount of renewables increase, the greater reduction in those emissions. So currently right now we're starting out with 58% renewables, which is awesome. And as that percentage increases, the emissions associated with buildings will go down, and eventually it'll be 100% by 2035. So if we have all electric buildings using 100% renewable sources, that potentially could take our emissions to zero when we are talking about buildings and the emissions associated with those. So that's really, really cool. So now we've got two graphs here. On the left-hand side are all the emissions that are given off in California by sector. So clearly transportation is the big one, all right? But in second are buildings. That's 20 to 25% of all emissions associated in California are due to buildings. Right? And of that 25%, a significant amount is because of space heating and water heating by burning natural gas. And so those combined are a grand total of 10%. So 10% of the state's emissions are due to using natural gas in buildings. So if we can go ahead and electrify our buildings, That's 10% we can take off right away, and that's really awesome. There's lots of work that's already being done to promote building electrification in California in the past few years. There's assembly bills, there's state bills that provide funding, issuing mandates to the CEC to study emission reductions associated with building electrification. There's lots of advocacy trying to include BE mandates in the next Title 24 building cycle in 2022. And also there's some utilities who are getting ahead of the curve, like Sacramento SMUD, by them promoting pilot programs and incentivize building electrification. There are currently over 40 municipalities that have adopted some sort of REACH code, building electric REACH code, either banning natural gas altogether or mostly banning it, and then there's some exceptions. So for instance, Berkeley is an example where they banned all new construction with all new hookups for new construction. And then in Brisbane and Burlingame, they have that, but there's a few exceptions for cooktops, some life sciences buildings, and some gas specific for profit kitchens, so restaurants and so forth. So they made some exceptions there. So you know, not all bans are the same. Now I want to expand why all electric buildings have lower costs. First, for new constructions, buildings can cost anywhere from $3,000 to $10,000 less per unit because you don't have to install that natural gas infrastructure. Operational costs for these buildings can also be considerably lower. For instance, utility bills could be anywhere from $100 to $500 lower when compared to using gas. The technology needed is mature, it's readily available. Heat pump systems for both water and space heating exist and are comparable in cost to the ones that use gas. And Carl's really going to go into that and really show you how that is. A little more detail on these costs. Again, building costs go down, the actual first cost, because you don't have to install the piping that literally comes from the gas main in the street to all the different units in the, you know, the development into the building, the walls and so forth. So you don't have any of that. So that's why it becomes so much cheaper. Operational savings are because heat pump systems are anywhere from 3 to 5 times more efficient than natural gas appliances. And again, Carl will talk about that. And then when you pair this with rooftop solar and, you know, that'd be awesome with storage, those costs fall even further because those electrons are cheaper than the ones you get off the grid. And then lastly, BE, the building electrification over time will actually increase costs for gas because you're going to have less and less customers for gas. And so the infrastructure is going to need to be maintained and improved. And so when you have fewer ratepayers using gas, and the costs are deferred over less people, causing it to be more expensive. So it'd be better to kind of electrify early. Now, the reason why we need, you know, building electrification in our state, and we need it now, is that our state is not quite as green as we think. The state of California is still issuing fracking permits, even though it has these emission targets that it's you know, touting. They're also issuing rebates for gas water heaters. Again, this is not going to do anything for the state to meet its targets. And lastly, like I said, there was lots of input for going all electric in the 2022 Title 24 update cycle. However, from what we're hearing, that's probably not going to happen. We're hoping that they at least will have some sort of mandate for, you know, heat pump water heaters or heat pumps for space heating, but we'll see. Lots of advocacy happening there. So that potentially means that we may not have an all electric building code until 2025, which is too late. This is why we need to advocate for building electrification at every level now, including locally. If the state can't do the right thing fast enough, then if we can do REACH codes here locally, we can do this much sooner. All right, this is already happening throughout the state. There's 40 cities that already done that, so we know it can be done. Most of them in Northern California, and we need that trend to start to continue down here in Southern California and in San Diego. All right, so now I'm going to transition over to the adverse health effects. Cam's going to go ahead and start speaking of those. So Carl's going to go ahead and switch the screen over, and he's going to take over. Take it away, Cam.
Thank you. In 2020, in the spring of 2020, 2 new reports were released. They are both studies researching the health effects of gas in built spaces. The first report is a meta-study out of the UCLA Fielding School of Public Health. It examined indoor and outdoor pollution in California caused by residential gas appliances, including furnaces, water heaters, and stoves. The second one is also a study about health and gas. This time, the focus was on gas cooking. Both of these studies are tangible, shareable information, complete with citations, many of which are hyperlinked right from the report. We go into some of the takeaways about the toxins they tracked and their effect on health. But first, let's ask a question. What percentage of households in California have at least one gas appliance? Is it 37%, 68%, or 90% of our households? The answer is 90%. That means California and San Diego have a lot of work ahead of us decarbonizing our homes. You probably remember being told that gas is clean burning with no emissions to consider. That simply isn't true, and no one in the industry has ever understood that to be true. Mandatory venting for gas appliances has always been the norm and the law, but vents for stoves rely on us to manually operate them. Less than 35% of Californians turn on ventilation hoods when they operate their stoves, and in some cases, there is no hood present. So let's dive into the pollutants that are given off when we burn gas. Carbon monoxide is one you've probably heard about. It is tasteless and
Hey, Cam, something happened and we can't hear you. Can you try and maybe mute and unmute or something?
Can you hear me?
Now we
Yes.
can. You may need to turn your
Okay.
video off.
Yeah, turn off the video.
Sorry.
Yeah, there we go.
Let's see. Should I start over on the carbon monoxide, or did we get most of that?
We got most of that. Go ahead and go to the next one.
Okay. Nitrous oxides include nitric oxide and nitrogen dioxide. Acute exposure effects include decreased lung function, asthma exacerbation, respiratory infection, and stroke. Chronic, again, that means long-term exposure, has been associated with premature mortality, lung and breast cancer, cough, shortness of breath, asthma, wheezing, and respiratory illness, especially in children. Again, stressing that these are things that science is showing us can happen to people who are breathing excessive nitrous oxides, and specifically relating to improperly vented stove use in the home. Particulate matter is a leading cause of mortality and morbidity in the world. The term PM 2.5 is used to describe very small particles that can hang in the air. Acute exposure to particulate
Just happened again, Cam. Whatever you did last time to fix it worked.
with combustion of gas. So even with an electric stove, you need proper venting to evacuate it. Particulate matter from gas furnaces and water heaters is much higher than a stove, but they are more likely to have properly functioning ventilation that is used consistently. But let's not assume that furnace and water heater combustion just vanishes. It still pollutes our communities in the form of outdoor air pollution. Formaldehyde, or CH2O, is the pollutant that we'll mention. It is an important air pollution problem but we have stress that with complete combustion and properly functioning appliances, its presence can be minimized. Formaldehyde in the household can come from a number of other sources, including from outside air, but the studies did include its risk to health, so we include it here. In the case of formaldehyde, the dose/response effects are nonlinear, so acute exposure may be significantly more dangerous. Formaldehyde's risks are many. Effects of acute exposure include respiratory, eye and skin irritation, sneezing, coughing, nasal congestion, drowsiness, chest tightness, shortness of breath, and asthma exacerbation. Chronic effects of long-term formaldehyde exposure include cancer, asthma and bronchitis in children, damage to respiratory system, headaches, sleep disorders, memory loss, birth defects, low birth weight, and even spontaneous abortion. It's important to note that the association with gas appliances and formaldehyde was the weakest of these toxins in one report, and in that report, they called for more investigation. However, the other report called out a specific risk found in long-duration simmering situations, such as cooking beans for several hours on the stove several times a week, which occurs frequently in our San Diego communities. Let's talk now about environmental justice. Some communities carry a much heavier burden of pollution and its effects. This is a Cal Enviro screenshot using a color coding system to spotlight communities with particularly bad health impacts from environmental pressures. You can see the neighborhoods of Sherman Heights, Logan Heights, Barrio Logan, and West National City clustered together in orange by the port side of San Diego. But other neighborhoods in dark green just a few miles away aren't subjected to this pollution. Importantly, there are also racial and income disparities between these neighborhoods, and that correlation isn't accidental. Pollution has been concentrated and mitigation has been ignored in communities of color. While gas combustion in the home isn't the core problem with air quality in environmental justice neighborhoods, gas in homes piles on top of an already bad situation. So an important step in moving forward with building electrification is to ensure that we address the communities that need to have their air cleaned up the most. We also have environmental justice communities in the North County of Oceanside, Vista, San Marcos, and Escondido.
Cam, you're cutting out again, just so you know.
Imagine picking up, Carl, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry.
Cam, we missed the last part of that slide. If you want to go back and do slide 30 again.
Slide 30, okay, sorry. Excuse me. One factor for people who rent apartments or live in smaller living spaces is that toxins in their home are more concentrated relative to that smaller living space. That means gas in those small spaces are worse for health. Okay. Imagine picking up the paper one day and realizing not only the company you work for, but your whole industry is about to shrink out of existence. We have the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant. It is right here on a fault line. There's tremendous amount of concern about that. There's no way with what we know today that we would build that plant as we built it, and people are rightly concerned about it. You're in a state where you have 3 faults that are well overdue for a major seismic activity, for a major earthquake. So this is an obvious and pointed concern. Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom, March 17, 2011. Your first instinct might be to fight to keep that job in that industry. That's the scenario many workers face as we transition to a decarbonized society. Taking people into account with a plan for how to address an impacted workforce is also part of a just transition. Much ink has been spilled describing the problem, but there have been very few examples of how a just transition has been done well. Let's review one example.
Oh, it happened again, Cam. You're good for like a minute or two, and then it pops down again.
Triple meltdown, new attention was placed on the...
Yes. Sorry, but you have to restart the beginning of this slide, please.
Yes, Diablo Canyon is California's last operating nuclear plant. From 2011 through 2016, following the Fukushima triple meltdown, new attention was placed on the fault lines surrounding this long-time job center in San Luis Obispo area. PG&E realized it wouldn't be prudent to renew their license at the plant and acknowledged it was not economically feasible to continue operating it. They began showing signs that they wanted to shutter it, but Diablo Canyon represented large numbers of jobs in the surrounding area. It also represents 9% of California's power, and the business represents a big part of the regional tax base. Closing the plant wasn't going to happen without people feeling major disruption and concern. Diablo Canyon is California's last operating nuclear plant. I apologize. Thank you. Friends of the Earth and Mothers of Peace, both of which had fought the nuclear plant for decades, showed up in force to help make sure the closure finally happened. Friends of the Earth, which is now an international organization, was founded on the campaign to block Diablo Canyon. So this was not just another environmental issue for them. But PG&E, environmental groups, and other local area stakeholders all worked to come up with a transition plan, including funds to help buffer the projected economic losses in the community from a shift in tax base. In June of 2016, they announced that they had negotiated an agreement to shut down by 2025, with plans to help workers with additional 25% retention bonuses to prepare for the job loss. For some older employees, it gave a path to wind down their careers. For younger workers, it gave time and resources to seek additional training and prepare for the next stage in their careers. Many workers now plan and use those new skills to be a part of a team who will spend years safely decommissioning and deconstructing the plant. Also, part of the deal was a new plan to replace Diablo Canyon with 100% renewable energy, which by 2016 had become a very critical goal among the environmental community and is a necessary target for PG&E, who have ever-growing minimum renewable energy commitments they must adhere to. In 2018, the CPUC tried to slash the workers' retention bonus to 15% and undo some other tenets of their joint proposal agreement. The IBEW was forced to lobby state legislators to restore the agreement with Senate Bill 1090. In the end, this is an important story of the community working together to find common ground and respect each other. It also is a reminder of the importance of organized labor to help ensure workers' rights and protections. PG&E has not yet followed through with plans to replace the 9% of Californian energy lost by the decommissioning of Diablo Canyon with fully renewable replacement energy. Recently, the Union of Concerned Scientists in a special report warned that unless someone intervenes, emissions may go up because of this. Sierra Club and the Center for Energy Efficiency and Renewable Technologies have warned that because gas power plants operate in communities of color, those environmental justice communities may once again be impacted most. Now I'm going to pass it to Carl, who is going to talk about efficiency and how some key technologies are needed for responsible building electrification.
Thanks a lot, Cam. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
President Carter in 1977 told us, "We must face the fact that the energy shortage is permanent. There is no way we can solve it quickly. But if we all cooperate and make modest sacrifices, if we learn to live thriftily and remember the importance of helping our neighbors, then we can find ways to adjust and make our society more efficient and our own lives more enjoyable and productive." This was also the moment when he asked people in the United States to put on a sweater. Many people mock Jimmy Carter for that, but when we face a climate crisis, we all need to be prepared to put on a sweater. So let's talk about efficiency, and engineers and scientists actually have a formula for efficiency. Efficiency equals power out divided by power in. This means efficiency isn't just hand-waving fuzzy term, but it's actually something that you can compute. You usually multiply it by 100, pop a percent on the end, and makes it easier to roll off the tongue, and people know when you've ended your sentence. So, efficiency, it doesn't get units. So it's not 89 watts or 89 amps or 89 volts. Instead, it just is 89% efficient. And I'll say it here and now so I can make a liar out of myself in a couple of slides. You cannot exceed 100% efficiency. 100% efficiency means that you have no waste or losses, a perfect machine. So why do we care? We care because using fossil fuels has gotten us into a bad place. Yet our society has become very dependent on powered things, often to keep us warm or cook our food. As we decarbonize and use electricity for our heating and cooking, for example, it's important that we don't get lazy and waste electricity unnecessarily. Our challenge to power everything with renewable energy is huge, but necessary. And by asking everyone to electrify, it's also our responsibility to never lose sight of efficiency. Let's dive into water heaters. Traditional electric water heaters use a pair of resistive coils to heat the water. With the old energy standard called energy factor, you could effectively understand this type of water heater to be 90 to 95% efficient. Most of the energy went directly into heating the water, and very little is lost to the ambient space around the water heater. Throwing on an insulating jacket, you could even increase the efficiency a bit more. But try as you might, you can't exceed an energy factor of 1 or 100% efficiency with this type of water heater. Remember, that's a rule, no exceeding 100% efficiency. But some rules were meant to be broken. Enter the heat pump electric water heater, or more accurately, the hybrid heat pump water heater. On the top of this rebellious machine, there sits a miniature compressor, and the system also has an evaporator and a condenser. The trick here is that it takes the ambient heat present in the air, and through a process of controlled compression and expansion of the refrigerant, it is able to transfer heat into the water at 3 to 4 times the efficiency of the standard electric water heater. This is game-changing, but it does require some air exchange to keep finding residual heat in the air. It blows out cold air as if it was a standing air conditioner in a room, redirecting the heat it extracted into the water tank. 370% efficiency in a heat pump water heater is technically against the laws of physics, but that's not really what's happening. Instead, it's cheating by borrowing heat energy from a different system, the surrounding air, even on a cold and chilly day. There's always heat energy in air everywhere, except the cold void of space. To discuss air-space heat pumps, it helps to start with the familiar. The central air ducted air conditioning system has 2 big parts, the compressor condenser and the air handler evaporator that will typically go into an attic space along with the ducting. The compressor condenser is that thing that you see outside that can make a lot of noise when it fires up. It's not actually sucking and blowing air from inside your house. It's only sucking air across the radiator fins in the unit that you see here. The heat exchange happens with copper tubing refrigerant lines that extend inside to the air handler. This diagram shows the different paths of an AC system. Just remember, this is the same principle for a refrigerator, a freezer, an air conditioner, and for various heat pumps. The machine just moves heat from one place to another. When I say heat pump, this thing doubles as your air conditioner. You don't need both because the heat pump is both. It's a twofer. Pretty much the only thing that differentiates a heat pump from a single-purpose air conditioner is that there's a reversing switch that sends the pressurized refrigerant in the other direction. This is why there isn't much difference in price between a traditional ducted air conditioning unit and a heat pump. Now I need to tell you what's a bit crude and old tech about the traditional design shown here. It is sized for the worst case scenario, hot or cold, and runs at 100% whenever it switches on. The AC compressor motor runs at a single speed determined by the 60 Hertz waveform of the grid's AC current. That results in an oversized energy hog that uses excessive energy to start up and blows as hot or as cold as it can every time it switches on. It's the equivalent of a car with an oversized V8 engine with only an ignition switch for speed control and no foot pedal to control the throttle. Dual speed compressors are a good improvement over the single speed, but it's a bit of a half measure compared to what I'll cover next. Now enter the mini split. This technology is used worldwide and has been for a few decades. It uses all the same principles of the heat pump we saw earlier, as it's reversible and exchanges refrigerant via copper lines. But the real tech jump here is something that we notice when we look at the size of the outdoor unit. It's much smaller and it runs really quietly. They make use of a scroll compressor as seen here, which is a smaller, longer running setup. It can also run at different capacities to adapt to the current needs. It uses inverters to run the AC compressor motor at infinitely varying speeds to change capacity, or some known as digital scroll compressors operate at a single speed but employ a solenoid mechanism to intermittently stop and start compressing while the small compressor motor soldiers on. These additional speed control methods, which are like a precision throttle pedal, to return to that analogy of driving a car, gives a modern scroll compressor versatility and allows a much smaller unit to run continuously, but with much lower power over a longer time. The fans for both the indoor and outdoor units of a split are DC fans and can easily run at different speeds when appropriate to save energy and steadily maintain temperature in the home. Another change with so-called split system is the indoor air handler doesn't rely on any ducting. Instead, the air exchange happens right in the room where it's being affected. So why is that important? It's important because ducting is a major efficiency loss in traditional whole house systems, sometimes costing 30% efficiency in the most extreme conditions. For larger homes, a single indoor air conditioner or indoor air handler isn't enough. Instead, multiple air handlers are used to focus the heating and cooling in the rooms that you're using and not in the ones that you're not. This offers the greatest flexibility and maximizes potential for efficiency. The indoor air handlers for split heat pumps can be hung on the wall for easy retrofitting. They can also be fit into the ceiling in the design called a cassette. In both cases, the air handlers can be sized appropriately for each room size and can distribute air to various parts of the room using an oscillating motion. But to take efficiency to the next level, the truly advanced air handlers can sense people's heat signatures in a room and direct conditioned air towards them. Imagine a home that tracks your movement as you change rooms. That's already happening today. As a final example of the winning efforts of maximizing efficiency, let's talk pool pumps. The pump affinity law quantifies that power consumption drops at a nonlinear rate as you reduce pump speed and water flow. When you cut the motor speed in half, the flow rate is also reduced to half, but the power consumption of the pool pump is reduced to 1/8 of the original draw. If you go even lower, the power savings keep multiplying. In practice, this meant reducing a 2 kilowatt, 66 gallon per hour pool pump to 22 gallon per hour and just 112 watts. You have to triple the operating time to filter the same amount of water, but you use roughly 1/6 of the energy. Recognizing this immense untapped potential, California passed the Title 20 law that mandated variable speed pool pumps. So I hope that gave you guys some understanding of how critical efficiency is as we electrify. We've covered a lot tonight, and we want to encourage folks to join us in the campaign and move to go all electric with our new construction, and eventually make our community all electric in all existing buildings. You can go to sdbec.org to sign a petition to show your support and get on our mailing list. And we'd like to take questions now if people have them.
There was one question in the chat that Niels had. I'll read it out. It says, a year ago, he changed his gas water heater to an electric one, but it was a resistance electric because he didn't know about heat pumps. He wished he'd known about it. Is it possible to just add a heat pump to what he has and then primarily use the heat pump? Do you guys happen to know that level of detail?
Yeah. I think at one time that was a possibility in the early days of heat pump water heaters. Now they're completely integrated. So I don't think that you'd be able to find something like that. And if you did, you'd still have the problem of finding a footprint for both units. So I'd say, Niels, you pretty much have to wait until your current unit gives up the ghost, or maybe find someplace to donate your unit if you want to upgrade. Sorry.
Let's see, the next question is from Jose, asking whether SDBEC is going to take a stand on net energy metering.
Wow, you're really asking a lot, Jose. So the short answer is no, we are not right now. And I'm speaking for the group, not having talked with the group about that, but I can tell you right now, there are 17 different proposals from various groups around the state on how we should proceed with net energy metering. It is a really deep and a heated topic. So everyone would like to support some form of net energy metering to try to help keep solar electricity on the rooftops continuing. But there's a lot of issues about how do we do that with equity, and how do we reconfigure NEM in ways that maybe make it easier for the power company to continue to work under net metering. I don't particularly think that's the main issue, but there's a lot of players in the room that are making different arguments.
Great, thank you, Carl. We have a question from John Knox. Why aren't there more incentives at the local, state, and federal level to help people switch out of gas appliances for electric?
Yeah, that's a great question, John. The first thing we should acknowledge is California is still so far behind on this issue that you can often find rebates for high efficiency gas appliances. So we're still giving people incentives and rebates to put high efficiency gas appliances in, instead of saying, no, we don't want any more gas appliances in. That's counterproductive to decarbonizing our buildings. So that's the first thing we need to do is ask for those gas incentives to go away and stop encouraging people to put more gas in. There are incentives for electric heat pump water heaters. I think almost any time I've ever gone to look, there's some form of incentive out there. But one thing you should understand is those do come from a state program, and that state program does have an allotted amount of money. So what will happen is they'll seed that money, and then as people make use of the incentives, it eventually dries up and then they refund it again. So if you get in a situation where you're ready to pull the trigger on something where it's optional for you, like say replacing your airspace heater because the last time a repair person came out, said this thing's about to go, you really need to consider upgrading or replacing the whole system. And that goes for your furnace or your air conditioner. If either of those two things are failing, you should seriously consider switching to a heat pump. That's a good position to be in, where you can wait and look for appropriate rebate to come up. Unfortunately, your heat pump water heater or a failed gas water heater is a situation where most people are not willing to wait for an incentive or a rebate to come up. I do know of at least one person that bought theirs ahead of time, knowing that it could take them a couple weeks or months to figure out the installer. I actually know 2 people that did that. So you can get your heat pump water heater when you see an incentive, and then start chasing after how you're going to actually get it installed. You do need to usually upgrade your garage or whatever space you have for the heat pump water heater to make sure that there's the right 220 AC going to it. And I should point out, in case Tom Abrams is on here, and Doug Cott and the folks in the technical group for SDBEC, we are expecting a 120 volt heat pump water heater to come on the market here this summer. Rheem has one of those coming out, and we're expecting to see others in the industry that follow.
Great. There's a question from Katie. Are there any efforts to make mini split wall units more attractive or concealed?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think your first impression when you look at one, if you didn't grow up in a home that already had them, is that it's this huge hulking pod sitting on the side of the wall, and it doesn't look particularly attractive. It becomes like a focal point that you didn't intend. So I will say that I've seen some pretty interesting ideas. The first one is that cassette that I mentioned earlier. And what that looks like is it's a 2 foot by 2 foot vent that they stick right in the center of the room. Now, the problem is for retrofitting, fitting a 2x2 unit in the ceiling is pretty extensive. You probably have to chop out some of your supporting beams up there and then kind of build a structure around to make sure that you support that. But the cassettes are very easily hidden. Then again, if you're in a retrofit situation, now you've got the old vents that are there for your ducting. So if someone wants to do a really clean job, you probably have to do some drywall work in there. One of the things that I've seen LG do that's really bizarre, they built one that's an air handler that looks like a piece of artwork. And on the front of it, it's got like a 2 foot by 3 foot front face that you can put any piece of art that you like on it. And when the thing fires up, it just tilts the panel forward a little bit, and it does the air conditioning and the heating right through that. And I guess the last one that I'll mention is there are some that look a little bit more like a traditional room radiator that you see in old homes that were heated by steam. So there are some that are more built towards the bottom of the room that can be hidden a little bit out of the way. You can even put them behind some piece of like faux furniture, but you do need them to breathe well at least.
Great. I have a question from Mark. I have a vent over my gas stove, but no fan. Does that meet code?
No, I don't think it does. You definitely have to have something active going there. Remember that while heat might rise to go out that vent, you can't really control where the toxic gases and the fumes are spreading around your kitchen. So not sure how you got a vent without one. Maybe somebody had installed that hood originally and then tweaked it. But no, you should definitely work to get that in there. And one of the things that I think cut out when Cam was talking about particulate matter 2.5 is that even when we're cooking with electric, you do want to use a vent, because when you cook on the stove, it does release some of that PM 2.5 just by the fact that you're cooking. So oils and things in the food break down, and they do create particles in the air that you don't want to breathe. So always important to use a fan and a vent, but especially important when you're cooking with gas.
Great. And Luke pointed out that that unvented range hoods weren't against code until recently. So
wow.
It's crazy. We've caught up on the questions. Any more questions from folks? Okay, got one from John. He says he's interested in a heat pump clothes dryer and an electric stove. Any recommendations?
Okay, so yeah, that's a good, let's talk about the clothes dryer. First option is, of course, if you're able to, using a clothesline and just hanging your clothing is a fantastic way to dry them. It's a lot easier on your clothes. They'll last longer than to be forcibly tumbled with heat in a dryer. But of course, not everybody's in a situation where they have the time or the space to use a clothesline. But I will point out, you can do that indoors. It doesn't always have to be hanging on a clothesline outside. So that's the first thing I would recommend, is most people can afford to at least move part of their laundry to doing it that way. In our household, we hang things on the hangers, but then we hang them up. Like we've got a post over a bed where we do it. We hang some in the shower. So there's places where you can just hang your clothes right on a hanger, let them dry out that way, and not use as much of the energy. When you plug an electric dryer in, you'll see that it's a 220 volt appliance. It is a pretty big hog when you use it, but when we look at the breakdown of how much electricity and or gas that the dryer uses, because you don't operate them that much during a given week, they don't tend to be the massive lag in your system. So it is one of the last appliances that I would replace. It might be a good thing to target when you have a failure for a dryer, to know that you want to upgrade to an electric dryer. And then specifically to your question about a heat pump dryer, they do make these. They're a fantastic idea, but they are still pretty cutting edge. So you'll probably have to order one. You'll have to find a local retailer that carries a line, find that line online that shows the specific model, and then order it through them. Let's talk about why would you use a heat pump dryer? The heat pump dryer, what it does is instead of venting to the outdoors and blowing a lot of hot air right out the side of your house, a heat pump dryer, what it does is it recycles that heat. And specifically, it has a way to help trap the moisture in the air and pull that out. And it collects it in a little receptacle that you can drain. It's not, you don't have to necessarily have a drain line. Sometimes it'll just fill up a little cup of water and you throw that water into a plant or something. And then the next cycle, you start it over again. But it's great because all of the heat that's created by the heat pump stays within the system. So it can definitely be a lot more efficient. But at this point, it's still pretty cutting edge. The other thing that you asked about was an electric stove. So certainly electric stove is a great option, and we do need to replace our gas stovetops. So electric stove can be as simple as the old coil style you see. Most of them now are actually with a glass top on top of the coils, but they're still using radiant heat. And then the most cutting edge here, but they've been around here for a long time, and they've actually become the norm most places in Europe, and I would guess in Japan, and some other places in Asia, is induction cooktops. And these just use a magnetic element, or they use magnetism. They use an electronic induction to excite the molecules in your pan. And so it heats your pan directly instead of heating the glass top. So that makes it even more efficient. But when you compare that to an electric stove, it's a win, but it's not necessarily something that you have to do. If your budget's tight, you can go with a standard electric cooktop.
Great. And folks pointed out that Consumers Reports has a recent issue that rates induction stoves, if you're interested in that as well.
Yeah, and I got a question from somebody recently saying, well, who sells these things in the area? And you may have a hard time finding somebody that has it on demonstration, right? So you may have to watch some online videos, get yourself worked up that, okay, that's what I want. Those are the features that I like. And then you may still have to order it. But you'll be able to find them for sale at Best Buy, Lowe's, Home Depot. I think there's an appliance dealer downtown called Aztec. Also, Pacific Sales has been specializing in induction cooktops for years. So you can definitely find them. And just know that when you first search, you may see the smaller self-contained ones that are single burner that you just plug into a receptacle. And that's actually a great way to prove to yourself that you're going to learn how to really enjoy the joys of induction cooking. So that's what we did in my house. Instead of replacing our full gas stove, we bought a really inexpensive just induction cooktop, and I use that every other night whenever I'm cooking something. And then in the extreme scenario where we need a couple burners, then we may fire the old gas one back up.
Nice. Ellen wanted to know if you had a system you would suggest for a new heat pump, air conditioner, and heating system. She has a ducted system currently.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Tom in our tech group described that he was in a situation where the home that they moved into was ducted. I think it had a kind of semi-operable air conditioning system, but originally the home wasn't really set up for the ducting completely. But when they decided they wanted to go heat pump, the most cost-effective way for them to move forward, and knowing that they lived in a pretty moderate climate zone or space in San Diego, they put in a heat pump ducted system, just because it was the most direct, easy replacement, maybe less bargaining in the household over what are we going to do to make this thing operable. So in the best case scenario, putting in a multi-split system, that's the best that you can possibly do as far as efficiency. But the ducting systems, the reason why the ducts are really bad in some climates is because they do run the ducts through the attic. So if you live in an extremely hot space like Phoenix, or an extremely cold space like the Northeast or the Midwest, and you've got really freezing temperatures in your attic, or really, really hot temperatures, which we all do have pretty hot temperatures in our attic, it does kind of counteract some of the ability of your system when you're using ducting. So I would say on retrofit, it's kind of a toss-up. If you have the money, you can replace your ducting. We live in a home that was built in 2001, and every time I go up in the attic to do work, because I do some of the electrical work in the house and catch mice up there and stuff, the ducting in our house is not sheet metal ducting. It's not really sophisticated ducting. It looks like dryer hose. So that, as of 2001, that was sort of the standard for doing the ducting. It's not sophisticated, and when an HVAC specialist comes in to replace a major heating unit or an air conditioning unit, they may actually suggest that you replace your ducting because it's 20 years old and it's full of dust and there's tears in it or whatever, and it's breaking down. It's not as sophisticated as the old sheet metal ducting. So you may find out that your ducting is not as hardcore as you thought it was, and you're not losing much by dropping the ducting. But I will say the installation of individual air handlers in all of your rooms is probably a pretty daunting expense or consideration for people. It's a lot of work up there. Depends on the size of your house.
Great. Well, I have one more question that we can use to wrap it up. It's been partially answered in the chat. I love how everybody's jumping in and talking to each other about some of these things. But Jean was asking about heaters for in-ground spas, outdoor barbecues, and outdoor fireplaces.
Yeah, so electric spas have been a thing for a while. So those ones that are kind of self-contained that show up on a truck and you just drop them in place. So you can use an electric heater for a spa. I'm not sure if they all use radiant heat or whether they actually use heat pumps. But in any case, at least it's a self-contained system. And because people don't use their spas literally every night, if you got an electric one that's existing like that, I wouldn't think that it's worth trying to retrofit something to it. But most of the built-in spas that are like maybe built into a pool situation or something that is really an installation, if you have a big gas heater for that, there are definitely substitutions that you can get that are either electric, radiant, or heat pump. I don't know the costs on those though, because I haven't seen anybody do that work yet. What were the other two things? Sorry.
Let me see if I can find it again. Sorry, it was outdoor barbecues and outdoor fireplaces. Yeah,
so Tommy Abrams in our group did get an electric outdoor barbecue. He said he hasn't used it. He's a vegetarian, or a vegan, I'm not sure which, but so they've only cooked vegetables on it. So he didn't have any report as to how good they did with the steak. But he did find one that's radiant heat. That's an outdoor barbecue. Sorry, the last one, I'm trying to answer these one at a time and I keep forgetting what you said.
Fireplace.
So I guess here's my thing on an outdoor fire pit. If you installed an outdoor fire pit, chances are it's not necessarily plugged into the gas line in your home. A lot of times they're run with an external propane thing. It could be one or the other, but in both cases, you're going to have to give up that fire if you want to decarbonize. You're not going to find an electric version of real fire. But keep in mind that, when you have an outdoor fire pit, you're really warming the air above the fire pit more than you're warming yourself. So maybe switch to, lighting and warmer clothes. I don't know. That's a tough one. But I will say that, especially if it's a separate propane thing, you can work on decarbonizing a lot of the other parts of your home and maybe count how many times you refill that propane over the years and decide for yourself whether that's a major factor or not. Be great if we can start building new ones that don't use that, but I'm not sure what an alternative is because you can't really replicate the flame without burning something.
Great. Well, I think we hit all the questions. Thank you, Carl.
Well, thank you everybody for being with us today. Thanks to Cam and Robert. And we're really glad that we were able to help participate in this week of celebrating green homes, and really appreciate everyone hearing us out on building electrification. And I hope that folks will be excited about helping us in our endeavors to decarbonize the spaces around San Diego.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And we'll send out a link with the slides and the recording if folks need it.
Yeah, and Bridget's reminding us there's more events all week at the Sustainable Building Week SD.com. Sustainable Building Week SD.com. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.